Good morning, great souls. So I'm going to read from Whispers from Eternity, and this is a book that Yogananda said, there's three books from which I read: the Christian Bible, the Hindu Bible, or the Bhagavad Gita, and his Whispers from Eternity. And this prayer demand is, make me anything, a Christian or a Hindu, anything to realize thee. Let me be a Christian, Jew, Hindu, Buddhist, Mohammedan, or Sufi. I care not what be my religion, race, creed, or color, if only I can win my way to thee. But let me be none of these if that identity enmeshes me in an enclosing net of religious or social formalities. Let me travel to the royal highway, the royal high road of realization, which leads to thee. If I am traveling on some bypath of religion, lead me onto the one common highway of realization, which leads straight to thee. Send me the sunshine of thy wisdom, that it lead me to the morning of my growing powers. And send me the moon of thy mercy to guide me rightly, if I am ever lost in the dark night of sorrow. Here we are at the Temple of Light, here at Ananda Village, and as you kind of see around, we have these niches honoring the great traditions, religious traditions of the world. Yogananda was once asked by a visitor to his Hollywood temple. It was called the Church of All Religions. And the visitor said, well, you call it a Church of All Religions, but you just focus on Christianity and Hinduism or yoga. Why do you do that? And he said that was the will of Babaji. And of course, all religions, there is an underlying, as this reading said, common highway of truth. But it was through these masters of this path of self-realization that the focus was on, as Yogananda called, original Christianity and original yoga. It was Christ whose mission it was for the spiritual evolution of the West, and it was Krishna's mission to work with the spiritual evolution of the East. And through this path now, the time has come for both of them to come together and to show that underlying unity of truth. Because this path is not one of eclecticism, of taking a little bit of this religion, a little bit of that tradition. No, I'm going to leave that because I don't really like that. But it's really showing that there's this eternal religion of Sanatana Dharma is the underlying truth that regardless of outer bypath is we all must come to find our higher self in God. So we, Nanda Devi and I and many others from here and other Ananda communities are about to go on pilgrimage. And what's so wonderful being part of this path is pilgrimage, it doesn't matter if you're going on pilgrimage to a Christian site or Hindu site or Buddhist site, we're looking for the saints and that vibration that can uplift our consciousness. And there is a pilgrimage that happened through Ananda in 1986 where everyone went to, not everyone, but a group went to the Holy Land. I was living the East Coast at that time and I was only 3, so I didn't go on that pilgrimage. But as you can imagine, everybody they're going to the sites of where Christ was and wanting to go and feel the inspiration, the vibration. And so they went to, I think it was called the Chapel of Shepherd's Grotto, and it was a significant place for Christ's life. And there's a sign that said closed for Mass. Well, that wasn't going to stop the Ananda group from going in. And they went into Mass, and they didn't really know what to do because none of them were Catholics except for one person, Mary Kretzmann. And so everybody who was in the Mass was just kind of watching Mary and what she was doing. And so when, she would stand up, they would stand up, but it was always kind of like a few beats behind. And, when she would kneel, they would eventually kneel. And the priest is noticing this. And he's noticing that, there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of sincerity, but he's also realizing these are not Catholics. And so afterwards, he comes up and he was very kind. He said, "Are you even Christian?" And they said, "Yes, we're Christians." But how do Christians normally define themselves? Well, these are the beliefs of the Christian, right? They say, "I believe in the one God. Jesus is the only Savior, the way and the life. The resurrection and the crucifixion." There was this one story where a fundamentalist Christian, came up to Yogananda and said, "You must be saved by the blood." And he said, "Produce a quart." And of course, she didn't know how to deal with that answer, and she just kind of hobbled away. But Yogananda said, our beliefs won't save us. It's really about the experience of Christ is what we're going for here, beyond just simple belief. And that's what's so thrilling about this path, is that there are the techniques by which we can actually commune with the Christ consciousness. The Christ consciousness that is in part of every particle of creation, that when we get still enough inside, when we be still, that is when we can start to feel that presence more, and that can enliven us like nothing else that the senses can do. There was somebody came up to Yogananda and said, "I love your teachings, but are you a Christian?" And this is what his answer was. "Didn't Christ tell us, 'Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven?'" Yogananda replied. In the Bible, the term heathen means an idolater, one whose attention is centered not on the Lord, but on the attractions of the world. A materialist may go to church on Sundays and still be a heathen. He that keeps ever alight the lamp of remembrance of the Heavenly Father and that obeys the precepts of Jesus is a Christian. He added, "It is for you to decide whether you think I am a Christian." So how do we keep alive that remembrance so that even if we're in a Sunday service here, how do we keep our concentration and attention on the present moment and what we're doing rather than on the football game that's going to be coming up soon, or on the dinner that's happening later tonight? How do we keep our mind on that? I remember going to Catholic Mass, and I was definitely one of those ones. I went out of obligation because I was supposed to, and my parents took me to Mass, and I'm very grateful for that happening. And I just always remember watching the people in the Mass, because I wasn't really interested in what was going on, and just seeing the contrast between those who you could tell they're just kind of looking around and kind of waiting for things to be done, and those who are just deeply concentrated. And I just remember seeing this one person in particular every Sunday. They always sat in the same place, and you could tell, they probably weren't aware of it, but you could tell they're focusing up here at the spiritual eye. Their eyebrows were knit because they're just so deeply concentrated on trying to just get the most out of the experience. And as we know, the spiritual eye is really what we're going for here. Another time, somebody asked Yogananda, they were talking about, they didn't agree with idol worship with the Hindu gods, and this was his reply about that. So a visitor spoke disparagingly of India's so-called idol worship, and the master said quietly, "If a man, sitting with closed eyes in a church, allows his thoughts to dwell on worldly matters, the idols of materialism, God is aware that he is not being worshipped. If a man, bowing before a stone image, sees it as a symbol and a reminder of the living, omnipresent Spirit, God accepts that worship." So the question is, where is our mind? Where is our consciousness? Is it on our ego and our likes and dislikes and kind of what's going on in the moment, the past, looking towards the future, or are we trying to take that next step towards the remembrance of God? The ego is seated here in the medulla. The Christ consciousness is seated here at the point between the eyebrows. I was reading last night this little book called The Visions of Teresa Neumann. Teresa Neumann was a central chapter in the autobiography of a yogi, she was a Catholic stigmatist, and Paramhansa Yogananda went and visited her in 1935 on his tour through Europe. And she received the stigmata of Christ, but she received visions of Christ's life throughout her whole life. And so this book was interesting because it was written by her. She had like a confessor, like a priest who was kind of with her during all these visions. And there was some skepticism, but then eventually he came on board that these were real, what was going on. And he said that when she would go into a state of rapture or ecstasy, she would lift her eyes. Common experience. She didn't know about the teachings, supposedly, of yoga, but again, it's something common to all of us. So how do we get out of this sense of ego consciousness and start to get more into the Christ consciousness? And it's really that journey from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. There's a book called Sadhu Beware, in which Swami Kriyananda wrote tips for ego transcendence. Not ego suppression, but transcendence. Because it's hard to know. I mean, you might say, how do I have all these thoughts I have going on in my brain? And I don't want to have these thoughts, these desires that are pulling me away. I want to find freedom in my heart. I don't want to hold resentment anymore. How do I do that? And how do I get out of this little sense of I, me, mine, and realize a greater I? Yogananda said, when this I shall die, then shall I know who am I. It's just beautiful. And so one of the, I think Swami gives like over 30 tips for ego transcendence. And one of them was, if someone fails to give you credit for something you have done, just accept it and just kind of move on. Not to say, oh, well, actually that was my idea, by the way, but just let it go and give the true credit to God. There was, in the Karma Yoga program here at the Expanding Light Retreat, Karma Yoga it's a way that for people to come to the Expanding Light at a much lower rate and who want to really immerse themselves in the teachings and the vibrations here at Ananda. And the practice of Karma Yoga isn't just doing dishes and gardening and things like that, but it's really trying to do whatever action we're doing, action karma, with the consciousness that God is flowing through us. Because don't we want to do the most mundane tasks but feeling joy? Well, we can do it. We just need to practice it. And so a thing that we did that will be probably reintroducing soon is we created these little seva cards. And the idea was that every karma yogi would get one of these cards during the morning cleanup, which takes about a half an hour. And the idea is that they're supposed to practice that technique as they're doing their service in the morning. And just quietly, and just they read the card, they do the technique, and then every few minutes we'd ring the bell to kind of bring their attention back to the present moment and to what was asked them to do. For example, the card might say, offer the fruit of your labors back to God, everything that you do, or try and feel God is flowing through you. So with this particular group, I had these cards printed out and laminated, and everybody got to choose a card. And then they practiced this exercise, and afterwards we sat down, and I had everyone go around, and I asked, what was your experience? So you can read your card, and what was your experience? And so this one man read his card, and this is what he read. Perform a random act of kindness. By practicing service anonymously or without drawing attention to oneself, one can avoid feeling the ego's desire for validation, and you can cultivate a deeper sense of humility. And boy, did that upset him. He's like, I want to be acknowledged for any act I do. I don't want it to be anonymous. And so we talked about it. And okay, the next week comes. We do this activity again. I give him a card. What card does he get? The exact same card. So he shares about it, and he's a little bit more upset, and he goes through it again. Third week. Make sure you don't give me the same card, Sundara. Okay, you choose. He chooses the same exact card. And this time, he said, I think I'm starting to get the picture here, you know. All that to say, you know, the ego is going to play tricks on us. Rajarsi Janakananda, one of Yogananda's foremost disciples, there's a talk of Yogananda you can listen to, and he asked Rajarsi to say a few words, and Rajarsi, he was a shy man. He didn't want to, but he did quickly out of, you know, loyalty and obedience to Yogananda. And he said, I have the Christ consciousness. No one can tell me that I don't. When the ego steps in, God steps out. When God steps in, the ego steps out. So isn't our whole journey just to get to that point where we can just let the ego step out? And that's why service is so important. And what is service? It's really just how we do things with the consciousness that God is flowing through us. And we're not thinking of ourselves. Here we say that meditation and service are opposite sides of the same coin. If we meditate all the time and think only of ourselves, you know, maybe we get lazy, maybe it just becomes more about us, I, me, mine. But when we start to take that meditation, that calmness, that joy we feel, and expand it into every action, every big interaction, little interaction, doesn't matter if it's small or big, then we start to have a living sadhana, that goes beyond. Because at Ananda, ideally, there's no separation between our practical demands of life and our spiritual priorities. Eventually, they just all be just one flow that we feel. There was a time when a story that happened December 24th, 1920, I believe. And this is when this man from Boston, Dr. Lewis, he was, I think he was brought up Protestant, but he had a lot of questions. He didn't really believe in, he was skeptical of different spiritual teachers, and there's a lot of things in the Bible he didn't understand. You know, the Bible can, what does that mean? You kind of scratch your head. So he heard Yogananda was in town. He knocks on Yogananda's door, and at the hotel he was staying at, and he said, you know, we read in the Bible, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. He said, can you explain this to me? Nobody else can do so. And he said, Yogananda said, I think I can. And he had him sit down in front of him, and he touched him on the spiritual eye, and he saw the 1,000-petal lotus in the spiritual eye. So he gave him an actual experience of that scriptural truth. And, you know, we need to think of how we can more and more focus our attention here at the seat of higher consciousness, the Christ consciousness here, to really become more and more a true Christian in that cosmic, expanded sense of the word, where we're, again, getting ourselves away from the back of the brain and moving it forward again and again. And of course, I think so many of us, I know I'll speak for myself, when I heard about Yogananda's teachings and meditation and read Autobiography of a Yogi and went to Tibet, and I experienced some pretty amazing things with different yogis there, not personally, but witnessing them, I thought, wow, that would be really cool to meditate and to be able to do those things, right? Okay, it would be wonderful to see the spiritual eye, to hear Om, to feel great joy, because isn't that why we're on the spiritual path, to experience these things? But as we know, you know, our spiritual practice is not just for ourselves. It's when this I shall die, when this ego shall die, then shall I know who am I. And so it's really about how do we deepen our spiritual life, not just for us, but for others, so that the fruit of our practice becomes just totally ripe and delicious and abundant. I remember when I was, this was several years ago, it was somebody's birthday party we were going to, and it was at Crystal Hermitage, and I was definitely the youngest person there at the birthday party, and most people who were sitting around the table at the Crystal Hermitage had been on this path for many years, and for 30, 40, 50 years. And I was just enjoying hearing them all reminisce about the early days of Ananda and their time with Swami Kriyananda, and it was just a joyous event. And at one point, a certain individual's name came up. And I had heard this person's name before in Ananda history, and they were a bugger, and it was a challenging person, and difficult to be around, and caused some trouble. And this person's name came up, and somebody said, oh yeah, that person, whoa, so-and-so was a character. And I was interested to see, okay, which direction was this conversation going to go? And almost instantly, they said, oh yeah, that was a character, but boy, they had this wonderful qualities. And the conversation just popcorned. Oh yeah, they were really great at this. They had this strength, and I was so touched by it, knowing the history of this person, and then just to see how the conversation just turned to support them. Because we are not our faults, we are not our sins. Forget the past, Yogananda said. Focus on the soul's growth and that potential for the soul. And so that was one of my most significant moments here at Ananda, to see how that could happen. How could a conversation like that happen in the world? Because we're mostly focused on ourselves. And as what did Swami Kriyananda, I think it was him who said, by cutting off the heads of others, we ourselves appear taller. So how can we focus on the potential of every one of us? Because when we do that, not only do we lift them up, but we lift ourselves up as well. I want to finish with this story of that I read that was very touching from the actress Katharine Hepburn. Yes. Yeah, Katharine Hepburn, yeah. Okay. It's a little bit longer, but it's a nice story. Okay. Once when I was a teenager, my father and I were standing in line to buy tickets for the circus. Finally, there was only one family between us and the ticket counter. That family made a lasting impression on me. There were 8 children, all under the age of 12. From the way they were dressed, you could tell they didn't have much money, but their clothes were clean, very clean. The children were very well behaved, standing in pairs behind their parents, holding hands. They were so excited about the clowns, the animals, and all the acts they would see that night. From their excitement, you could tell they had never been to a circus before. It was going to be the highlight of their lives. The father and mother stood proudly at the front of the little group. The mother holding her husband's hand, looking at him as if to say, "You are my knight in shining armor." He was smiling, enjoying seeing his happy family. The ticket lady asked about how many tickets they needed, and he proudly responded, "I want 8 children's tickets and 2 adult tickets." Then she announced the price. The wife let go of her husband's hand, and her head dropped, and the man's lips began to quiver. He leaned in closer and asked, "How much did you say?" The ticket lady repeated the price. He didn't have enough money. How was he supposed to turn around and tell his 8 children that he could not afford to take them to the circus? Seeing what was happening, my dad reached into his pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, and dropped it on the ground. We weren't rich by any means. My father bent down, picked up the $20 bill, tapped the man on the shoulder, and said, "Excuse me, sir, this fell out of your pocket." The man understood what was happening. He wasn't being handed charity, but he gratefully accepted the help of his desperate, heartbreaking, and embarrassing situation. He looked straight into my father's eyes, took my dad's hand in both of his, squeezed the bill tightly, and with trembling lips and tears streaming down his cheek, he replied, "Thank you, sir. This really means so much to me and my family." My father and I went back to our car and drove home. That $20 my dad gave away was what we had planned to use for our own tickets. Although we didn't see the circus that night, we felt a joy inside that was far greater than seeing the circus. That day, I learned the true value of giving. The giver is greater than the receiver. If you want to be great, learn to give. Love has nothing to do with what you expect to get only with what you expect to give. Give everything. The importance of giving and blessing others cannot be overstated because there's always joy in giving. Learn to make someone happy through acts of giving. Om.
The way to perfection is narrow and steep. The bypaths are many, the pitfalls are deep. By theory alone, many think to arrive. Here's one who could teach them if he were alive. A philosopher stepped into a boat, the river to cross would he. So learned was he thought no man could be half so clever as he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he.
To the boatman he said,
Good man, pray tell of the German philosophers three, Schopenhauer, Hegel, und Kant, whom you deem the wisest to be. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Please excuse me,
the
sir,
boatman said,
I've not read your philosophers three. All day I'm obliged to ply these oars to support my family and me. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. In that case, my good man, your wretched life is as good as a quarter lost. Why, without the writings of those three men, not a shelf of books would I trust. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Now then tell me, good man,
the scholar said,
have you studied the Frenchman Descartes? I've told you before,
the other cried,
I'm unschooled, hard work is my art. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Hard work? What a waste! Sad, foolish man, half your life has been thrown away. Yet still a fragment might be redeemed. Memorize one theory a day. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Of a sudden a storm with raging might did lash that river to foam. Like a drifting pedal it tossed their boat till it seemed they'd never get home. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he.
then the boatman cried,
My learned sir, our chances are growing dim. 2 questions you put me so far this trip. Now I'll ask you one. Can you swim? Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. I can't swim a stroke.
the philosopher cried as he clung in despair to an oar.
Then the whole of your life is lost, my friend. You'll not need those books anymore. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. Singing wise, oh, with his book so, such a mighty scholar was he. The boatman regressed to stay his fare, never reached the opposite bank. All that ponderous learning inside his head gave him weight, you see, and he sang. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a weighty scholar was he. Singing wise-o with his books-o, such a weighty scholar was he. La 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 la.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed who thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, they shall be called the children of God. Blessed those reviled for righteousness' sake,